The kitchen was quiet that night, too quiet. Only the low hum of the refrigerator filled the air as I sealed the last little plastic bag of sunscreen and labeled it for Olivia. My reading glasses slipped to the end of my nose while I double-checked the names written in careful, fading ink. Each bag had been packed with love sunscreen, snacks, tiny souvenirs that read Aloha and Grandma loves you. I had been planning this trip for 3 years, saving, hoping, dreaming. It was supposed to be the 1 week where we could all be together again, where my son and his family would finally have time to just be. Then, at 11:02 p.m., my phone buzzed. You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just her family. That was all it said. No greeting, no explanation. Just a single message that hit harder than a slap. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart thudding in the silence. I waited for another text. Maybe a just kidding, Mom, or we'll make it up to you. But instead came a second one. Don't take it personally. It's just simpler this way. Simpler. I placed the phone face down on the table, as if hiding the words could make them less real. Around me, the soft light. Under the cabinets, through long shadows. Across the countertop, I had scrubbed earlier that evening. I could still smell the faint scent of lemon cleaner. And for a moment, I just stood there, suspended in disbelief. I had paid for that vacation, every ticket, every room, every little detail. I had chosen the villa on the beach because I remembered how my late husband used to say the ocean could heal anything. I thought maybe it could heal us. To the distance between me and Nathan, the small, awkward silences that had replaced our long conversations. But apparently, I was no longer part of their family. The shame came before the tears. Not anger, not sadness, just that heavy, humiliating shame that makes you feel like a fool for hoping. I thought of all the times Tanya, my daughter-in-law, had corrected me in front of the kids, or rolled her eyes when I told stories about their father. I had noticed it, the quiet dismissals, the forgotten invitations, the photos I wasn't in. But I never believed Nathan would let it go this far. He used to be my best friend. When he was little, he'd draw me pictures that said, "My mom saves the day." He'd bring me pink tulips every March just because. Even when he moved away, he'd call every Sunday. Now all I had was a text message telling me to stay home. I looked at the duffel bag I'd packed earlier, 2 sundresses I hadn't worn in years, a framed photo of my husband, and a lavender candle I planned to light on the beach in his memory. I'd imagined all of us together, barefoot in the sand, the children giggling as the sun dipped below the horizon, but that memory would never happen. I sat down, staring at the half-finished souvenirs on the table, each one meant for a child who probably wouldn't even notice I was gone. And in that moment, I realized something painful, but true. I had been preparing for a reunion that only existed in my mind. That trip wasn't about family anymore. It was about control. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Mom. I had become the person who paid for everything and was expected to quietly disappear when her part was done. So I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen and whispered to no one. Maybe it's time they remember who taught them how to stand. Then I picked up my phone, opened my banking app, and stared at the account name at the top. Hawaii Travel Fund. The balance blinked back at me. $21,763.84. Every dollar saved from tutoring, from skipped dinners, from sacrifices no one knew about. For a long while, I didn't move. Then slowly, I hovered over the small blue button that said, Freeze account. I didn't press it, not yet, because before I acted, I needed to be sure this time. I was doing it for me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the words from his message floated behind my eyelids. You've already done your part by paying. By the time the sky began to pale with dawn, I was still sitting in the same chair, a mug of cold tea untouched beside me. My kitchen felt unfamiliar, like I had stepped into someone else's life. The photos on the wall, my son in his graduation gown, the family Christmas card, the framed picture of me and James on our honeymoon, suddenly felt like artifacts from a world that no longer existed. Around 6 in the morning, I opened my laptop. It was old and slow, the kind that hums loudly when it wakes up, but familiar, a small comfort in a night full of loss. I clicked open the folder labeled Hawaii Trip. There were spreadsheets, receipts and detailed notes, flight numbers, meal plans, emergency contacts, allergy lists. I had planned every detail down to the type of fruit baskets waiting in their rooms. Then I opened another file, one I hadn't touched since the beginning. Hawaii Travel Fund. There it was, glowing in neat, digital print, $21,763.84. That number had been my goal, my finish line. Every tutoring session I took after retirement, every dollar I tucked away instead of buying new shoes or heating the house properly in winter, all of it had been for this, to give my family a memory worth keeping. But now, the memory would belong only to them, without me. I leaned back in my chair, hands trembling slightly. The shame returned, that quiet ache of being erased. For years I'd been trying to earn a place in my own family, mistaking convenience for closeness and silence for peace. Then out of nowhere, something shifted inside me. A thought so simple, it startled me. What if I stopped trying to earn what should never have been conditional? I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked in the white emptiness, waiting. I began typing names. Carol Louise Beverly Nora Denise. Women I knew from church, from the community center, from life's quieter corners. Women who, like me, had given everything to their families and been left behind. Women who had once laughed easily but now spoke with that same soft exhaustion I heard in my own voice. Beside each name I typed one line, deserves to be seen. It was the beginning of something, though I didn't yet know what. After a long pause, I went back to the bank tab and hovered over the freeze account button again. A small box popped up on my screen. Are you sure you want to pause all linked transactions? I stared at it, thinking about their faces, Nathan's polite detachment, Tanya's smiling dismissal, the children's innocent laughter. They'd arrive at the airport, confident everything had been paid for. They'd check in for the flight I had booked. They'd hand over their boarding passes, never suspecting the ground beneath them was already shifting. I thought about the irony. For years I'd felt invisible. Maybe it was time they finally noticed what it felt like when I disappeared. I clicked. Yes, another message appeared. All linked cards will be disabled immediately. I clicked again. Then the screen went still. For a moment nothing changed. Not the room, not the hum of the refrigerator, not the faint light creeping through the curtains. But something inside me did. It wasn't revenge. It was recognition, a quiet reclaiming of the power I'd forgotten I still had. I closed the laptop gently and stood up. The sun was breaking through the blinds, soft and golden, painting long stripes across the floor. I walked to the cupboard, pulled down an old mason jar tucked behind a vase, and smiled faintly. That jar had once been my secret, the dream jar. Every spare dollar I'd saved had started there before it made its way to the bank. Each bill had represented hope, hope for togetherness, for healing, for being seen again. Now, maybe it would fund something else, something new. I unscrewed the lid and slipped in a $20 bill from my wallet. Not for them, but for me. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel foolish for dreaming. The morning of their flight arrived quietly. The kind of still morning that makes the world feel suspended in time. I woke up early not because I had to, but because I couldn't stop thinking about what was about to unfold. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of peppermint tea and watched the first streaks of sunlight climb the walls. The air felt different that day, heavier somehow, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My phone was face down on the table, just where I had left it 2 days ago. I hadn't heard from Nathan. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. By mid-morning, I checked the time, 8:12 a.m. They'd be at the airport now, checking in, smiling for selfies, juggling luggage and lattes, assuming everything had gone perfectly according to plan. But their plan depended on me, on my name, on my account, and that account was frozen. Still, I didn't feel satisfaction, just peace. Not loud or fiery, the quiet kind that comes when you've stopped begging for people to see your worth. A notification blinked on my phone. It was from Tanya. Just confirming the final payment went through, right? Everything set for check-in? I stared at the message for a long while. Her tone was cheerful. That practiced sweetness that had always hidden the sharp edges beneath. I typed a reply, then erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, I sent just 2 words. All set. It wasn't a lie. Everything was set, just not the way she thought. A few minutes later, I opened my social media feed. The first photo hit me like a cold wave. Tanya had posted a family selfie in the back seat of their Uber. her manicured hand holding a coffee cup, the kids grinning in the back seat, Nathan flashing a peace sign. The caption read, "Off to paradise, family only." That last part, family only, stung sharper than I expected. Not because it was new, but because it was so normal for them now. I zoomed in on Nathan's face, my son. My boy who used to chase fireflies in the backyard, who once promised he'd take me traveling when he was grown. He looked happy, maybe even relieved. I set the phone down and took a deep breath, trying to let the ache fade. Then another message came through, from the travel agency. Alert, payment method declined for villa reservation. A second one followed. Alert, card authorization failed for airline booking. And then another. Transaction failed. Rental service unable to verify payment. It had begun. Somewhere at that very moment, they were standing at the check-in counter, the kids fidgeting. Tanya pretending to stay calm. Nathan trying to make sense of what was happening. I could picture it all. The airline agent explaining politely that the card was invalid. The confused glances, the whispered arguments. The dawning realization that something was wrong. They'd try again, and again, until the truth slowly surfaced and that the person who had paid for it all had quietly pressed pause. And while their frustration grew thousands of miles away, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea and staring at the candle. I'd once planned to light in my husband's memory. Maybe, I thought, this was what he'd meant when he used to tell me, "Don't let them forget who you are." Because for years, I had been fading, reduced to background noise in a life I helped build. But now the silence wasn't theirs to give me. It was mine to choose. As I watched the flame flicker in the lavender candle, a small smile formed, not a bitter one, but soft, the kind that comes when you finally understand your own strength. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. And in that moment, somewhere between their confusion and my calm, I knew the story was changing, and this time, I would be the one writing it. 2 days passed before Nathan finally called. His name lit up my screen, and for a moment I hesitated. I could almost hear his voice in my head. The same tone he used whenever he wanted something wrapped in politeness. I answered anyway. "Mom," he began, clipped, controlled. "We had some issues at the airport." I said nothing. The silence stretched until he sighed. "The cards didn't work. Tanya said you might have..." He stopped. The way he said might have told me he already knew. "I froze the account," I said simply. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, with that tone only adult children can use when they forget their parents or people, he said, "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" The kids were upset. Tanya was embarrassed. "I imagine it wasn't pleasant," I replied. "This wasn't fair," he snapped. "You can't just..." I interrupted quietly. "Nathan, when was the last time you called me because you wanted to, not because you needed something?" Silence again. A heavy, honest kind. "I paid for everything," I continued, my voice steady now. "I planned it, I saved for it, and when you said I wasn't invited, I realized I'd been paying for memories. I wasn't allowed to keep," he didn't respond. "Maybe he couldn't. I'm not angry," I said softly. "Just done pretending I don't notice how invisible I've become." The line went quiet for so long that I thought he'd hung up. Then he said, almost whispering, "You didn't have to do that, Mom." "I did," I answered, "because you wouldn't have listened otherwise." I could hear him breathing, slow and uneven. Then the call ended. That evening, I opened my laptop again. The file labeled Hawaii trip sat there like an old wound. I hovered over it for a long time before dragging it into the trash. Then I opened a new document and typed a different title, "The Journey That Finally Belonged to Me." The cursor blinked expectantly, as if waiting for me to fill the empty page. So I did. I pulled out the notebook. I'd started days earlier, the one with the list of names. Carol, Louise, Beverly, Nora, Denise. Women who knew how it felt to give and be forgotten. The next morning, I called them one by one. Carol was first. "A vacation?" She laughed. "With us?" "Are you serious?" "As serious as the sun," I said, smiling. They were hesitant at first. Money, time, family obligations. But I reminded them of something we'd all forgotten. We had already spent our lives giving everything away. Maybe it was time to give something back to ourselves. By evening, all 5 had said yes. We wouldn't be going to Hawaii, though. Too far, too expensive, too symbolic. Instead, we chose something simple. A weekend by the coast. A small seaside inn with chipped paint, homemade breakfast, and the kind of quiet that fills the soul. When I confirmed the booking, I used the same account I'd once frozen. This time, for something that was mine. As I closed my laptop, I felt lighter. Not younger, not reborn, just real. That night, I packed a small bag. Nothing fancy. A few dresses, a scarf James had once bought me, and a single seashell. I kept on my dresser a piece of a dream that had waited long enough. Before going to bed, I stood by the window. The moonlight stretched across my kitchen floor, soft and silver. I whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time in years, the words didn't sound like a plea. They sounded like truth. The coastal air was different, softer, cleaner, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers. The inn wasn't anything fancy, just a weathered white house with blue shutters and flower pots that tilted in the wind. But to me it felt like freedom. The women arrived one by one, each carrying not just luggage, but the weight of quiet years. Carol brought her knitting bag. Beverly arrived with a camera she hadn't used since her husband died. Nora carried homemade jam wrapped in a scarf. Denise came last, smiling shyly, her eyes already glistening. We hugged awkwardly at first, strangers bound by shared invisibility. But by the end of the first evening, something inside the group began to thaw. We cooked together, laughed too loudly, and stayed up late sharing stories that had been locked away for decades. Each confession felt like a thread, weaving us into something whole again. At sunrise on the second day, we walked along the shore, our footprints vanishing behind us as the tide crept in. Carol joked about how her kids would never believe she'd left the house without calling them. Denise said her daughter still texted her grocery lists as if she were a maid. We laughed, but behind every laugh there was recognition. Somewhere in that laughter, I realized what this trip really was. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. We weren't running away from being mothers or wives or caretakers. We were walking back toward the women we had been before the world demanded so much from us. That evening, as the sun sank into the sea, we gathered on the porch. Beverly played an old song on her phone, one from the 70s. Something warm and nostalgic. We sang softly, our voices uneven but honest. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the wind brush against my face. It felt like being touched by time itself, gentle, forgiving. When I got home 2 days later, the house felt different, lighter. Not because anyone had cleaned or changed it, but because I had. There were 3 voicemails waiting for me, 2 from Nathan, 1 from Tanya. I listened. Nathan's first message was sharp, frustration edged with guilt. The second was quieter. He said the kids missed me, that they'd talked about Grandma's big surprise, and how confused they were when the trip didn't happen. Tanya's message surprised me most. Her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't realize how much you'd done for us." I'm sorry. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because finally, they were seeing me. Not for what I could give, but for who I was. That night, I opened my journal and wrote one last line beneath the title. The journey that finally belonged to me. Sometimes you have to lose everything. You planned to find what was meant. For you all along, I closed the book, set it on the table, and turned off the light. The world outside was quiet. No messages, no noise, no expectations. Just peace. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something beautiful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be invited. I was already home.